Genesis is, sorry, I'm going to pass, yeah, okay, I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues, Venetia and Holly, who will be giving more context about today's meeting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Venetia Dave. I'm an incoming senior at Amador Valley High School, and I'm also the new president of the Grassroots Law Project at Amador Valley High School, as well as a summer intern at Genesis. During the school year of 2020 to 2021, our club started looking into the School Resource Officer program. We learned that Pleasanton Unified School District spends over $400,000 on 2.5 officers who are assigned to the 3 middle schools and as well as the 3 high schools in Pleasanton. We have listened to parents, teachers, students, residents, and administrators who have voiced a spectrum of concerns about the SRO program. One issue that we discovered was that the SRO program did not have a clear agreement between the city, the school district, and the police department. That is why we created this forum. The City Council of Pleasanton and the trustees of the school board are creating a memorandum of understanding for the SRO program through a liaison committee. We have attended the liaison committee and have learned that the SRO and MOU has not been created and will not be finalized before school begins. This moment has created an opportunity for us. The community leaders of Genesis and the GLP have worked all summer to think of ways to impact the MOU. Here's what we hope for tonight. First, that the elected officials who are here tonight are able to gain a good understanding of the concerns of the community and the possible alternatives to discipline and mental health investments to youth. That there will be a deeper discussion on how SROs handle the involuntary psychiatric commitments of the students, that there will be a clear process on how to evaluate the success and challenges of the SRO program, and finally, that you, our community, will learn and reflect on how we can work together to best support our students. Throughout this forum, today we'll be discussing in further length about the SRO program and the MOU, and raising awareness and advocacy for our demands in hopes of having them passed when the final MOU is being voted upon. Now I will pass it on to Holly for the meeting agreements.
Hi everyone, my name is Holly Fletcher and I'm also a rising senior at Amador Valley High School and I'm a member of Grassroots Law Project. Tonight I wanted to outline for you some of the meeting agreements, which firstly we will be accepting questions in the chat to our hosts and co-hosts, which will be answered during our Q&A session. And while discussion is open to everyone, our priority is to hear youth and student voices tonight as SROs directly affect our youth. Our session will not be open mic, but anyone can contribute in the Q&A session via chat or in our small discussion rooms later. Throughout this meeting, we'll have our timekeeper, Nadia Raymond, keeping time for questions in different segments of this session. And please wave and say hi, Nadia. And thank you all for attending this evening and hearing our agreements. And I'll now be passing it off to Oscar Lopez to further discuss SROs.
Good evening, everyone. Just give me 1 second to set up my PowerPoint. Let's see. Sorry, Marie, is there any way I can? Oh, there we go. Great. So good evening, everyone. My name is Oscar Lopez. I am the interim director of the Education Advocacy Clinic at the East Bay Community Law Center. We are a clinic at a Berkeley Law School where I am also a lecturer and I teach a class on school climate and the history of the school to prison pipeline in the United States. A little bit more about the East Bay Community Law Center. We represent young people who are often referred to the probation department for school-related arrests. We'll represent them in their delinquency proceedings. We also represent them in expulsion proceedings, and in special education matters. We utilize a holistic services model, which means that on nearly every case that we work on, we also staff a social worker. And we also do some work with community-based organizations, like the Grassroots Law Project and Genesis, who I am really appreciative of for inviting me here today. I've learned a lot about the work that the Grassroots Law Project and Genesis has been doing in Pleasanton through our coalition, the Free Our Kids Coalition, and I have been very impressed by the work that they've done. So what I want to talk to you all about today is just some basic parameters about the legal requirements for school resource officer programs, as well as some of the data that I've been pulling about the school resource officer program in Pleasanton Unified. I want to start with just a little bit of a history lesson. As I mentioned, I am a lecturer at Berkeley Law School, where I study the history of the school to prison pipeline. One of the things that I want to discuss is actually the history of school resource officer programs in schools. I think there is a common narrative, but an incomplete narrative that school resource officer programs actually started after the shooting in Columbine High School. While a lot of school resource officer programs did become a lot more common after the Columbine High School shooting, the reality is that school resource officer programs have actually been around since the 1950s. In fact, the very first school resource officer program was in Flint, Michigan back in 1953. And this actually coincided with a lot of the desegregation cases in the South, in particular the Brown versus Board of Education case in 1954. Then in the 1960s, what we saw was that there were massive student protests against the Vietnam War. There was a civil rights movement, and during that time, there were several cases that went up to the United States Supreme Court, and those cases established the rights for students before they can be expelled from school. And one of the really interesting things about those cases is that when you read the facts of those cases, you will see that often the school resource officers involved in those cases were actually charged with suppressing student voice. They were asked to essentially arrest students who were part of the civil rights movement. And I think that's part of the history that often doesn't get told. So I want to make sure that everyone has a good understanding of, a good holistic understanding of school resource officer programs. Then in 1994, there was federal legislation called the Federal Gun-Free Schools Act, which actually created funding for what's called a COPS program. It's a program based on the community-oriented policing model, in which the federal government will provide funding to local municipalities to begin school resource officer programs. And that date is extremely important in 1994 because it was around that same time that there was a sociologist, John DeLulio, who was spreading a narrative about super predators, which turned out not to be true when you actually look at the research. However, that position that John DeLulio took actually was part of the history behind school resource officers in schools. And then, of course, unfortunately, there were tragic incidents in the late 1990s that resulted in even more school resource officers in schools. But I just wanted to start with that bit of history because throughout that time, the California legislature actually started to enact bills, laws that created school resource officer programs and school police departments. But one thing to be aware of is that last year, the California legislature actually went in a very different direction. They passed a law last year, which now says that school districts are encouraged to utilize alternatives to school resource officers. In particular, the California Education Code now says that school districts should instead invest in mental health services, as well as professional development for school staff on cultural competency, and restorative justice. At the same time, there are some additional guidelines that are required for school districts that do in fact decide to continue utilizing school resource officers. Now, I've been working with several school districts throughout California, including Hollister Unified in Central California, as well as Oakland Unified. Both of those school districts have actually decided to move away from utilizing school resource officers, but instead, what they are doing is changing their board policies. In particular, they are changing board policy 5144, which discusses student conflicts and how to address any disruptions at school sites. So I've been working with several school districts that are actually trying to create guidelines for how school staff should interact with school police, when to make a call, what are some alternatives that you can utilize before making a phone call to police. So that is an alternative that is available to every school district in California, including Pleasanton. However, if a school district decide to continue utilizing the school resource, they are required under state law to have comprehensive safety plans at the school site level that specifically discuss the guidelines for the roles and responsibilities of those school resource officers. Now, one thing to acknowledge is that the California State Legislature also promotes, again, the use of mental health resources, restorative and transformative justice programs, and positive behavior interventions and supports instead of relying on law enforcement. And I think this is an extremely important issue because there is a report that came out of the Alameda County Healthcare Services in 2018. And what that report found was that unfortunately, first responders were being called far too often to respond to 5150 calls. And this was putting a strain on first responders. In fact, the Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services said that instead of calling first responders, that the county should instead begin developing an alternative so that schools will no longer have to rely on first responders to respond to these calls. And indeed, the county developed something called a mobile crisis unit. This is a program that is available throughout school hours from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. The mental health providers that are part of this county mobile crisis unit are authorized to conduct 5150 evaluations. And I'm aware that the Pleasanton City Council is currently looking into this program and considering utilizing the mental health providers from the county instead of relying on the Pleasanton Police Department. So I want to make sure that I highlight this portion because Alameda County is the #1 county for 5150 holds in the entire state of California. And unfortunately, recently was subject to a lawsuit by the Department of Justice because of the over-reliance on these 5150 holds. And lastly, one thing that's extremely important for any guidelines related to school resource officer programs is student privacy. So there are several records that are maintained by school districts, including academic records, attendance records, school discipline records. However, federal and state law is very clear that the only time that such records can be shared with school resource officers or other law enforcement officers is when there is a clear, proper police purpose. Under California state law, that is specifically defined as a student who has been kidnapped. And that is it. That is all that is considered a proper police purpose. The other exceptions are when law enforcement officers have prior written notice from at least one parent, or when a law enforcement officer has a lawfully issued subpoena or a court order. This is extremely important to highlight because if school staff do indeed share student records outside of the law, they are actually subject to criminal misdemeanor charges. So it's really important to have proper guidelines around the sharing of student records. I just quickly want to highlight that there are several other school districts within Alameda County that have been moving away from relying on school resource officers. Hayward Unified recently eliminated their school resource officer program. So did Oakland Unified. Piedmont Unified was considering creating a school resource officer program, but voted against it. And Fremont Unified also recently eliminated their school resource officer program, but then did indeed bring them back just recently with a change of school board members. There are a few other school districts, such as Alameda Unified, that eliminated their school resource officer program, and Berkeley Unified is also considering eliminating their program. So there are other school districts within the county that have moved in this direction, and I think this is important because obviously there are a lot of questions. What happens when you don't have school resource officers, right? What do you do when something happens in schools? Luckily, these other school districts have been wrestling with those questions and have come up with really great protocols about how to resolve student conflicts without the need to escalate to first responders. I want to highlight some of the data as well, because I know what you may be thinking. These are school districts like Oakland Unified or Hayward Unified. They're very different from Pleasanton. But when we look at the data, unfortunately, that isn't exactly true. I looked at the 2017 through 18 civil rights data collection. This is data that's collected by the Federal Department of Education. And according to the Federal Department of Education, Pleasanton Unified actually has the third highest referrals to law enforcement in the entire county for schools, school districts, and they are just Oakland Unified, right? So this is something that's a little bit surprising. And one thing that I want to highlight is that although in many other school districts, it's Black and brown students that are disproportionately referred to law enforcement, and that is in fact the case in Pleasanton as well. One thing that is unique about Pleasanton is that the students who are referred to law enforcement the most are actually white students. White students represent 40% of the school district, but make up 53% of students that are referred to law enforcement. So in Pleasanton Unified in particular, it is white students, Black and brown students that are all referred to law enforcement at higher rates than their population. And just a couple of other quick notes too, sorry. There are two high schools in particular, Amador Valley and Foothill, that have the highest rates of referral to law enforcement. Next, I want to look at the arrest rates. So referral to law enforcement is simply something, it could be something as simple as picking up a phone and asking a law enforcement officer to talk to a student, potentially question them when they're in the middle of an investigation. An arrest is when that student is actually detained and taken to the Juvenile Justice Center in Alameda County. When we look at the data, similarly, Pleasanton Unified actually has the fourth highest arrest rate out of all the school districts in Alameda County. They are tied with New Haven Unified for the highest arrest rates. And again, similarly to the data I showed earlier, it is mostly white students that are disproportionately impacted by these arrests. In fact, white students made up 75% of the arrests in Pleasanton Unified in the 2017-18 school district. So this is data that's reported to the Federal Department of Education. Sometimes there are data errors though. So what I wanted to do was to look specifically at the data that's provided by Pleasanton Unified. And when I looked at that data, I found that the arrests were even higher than what is reported to the federal government. In 2016, there were 54 arrests out of Pleasanton Unified. In 2017, there were 24, right? And you can see the rest of the numbers here. What's interesting is that I have the numbers for Oakland Unified just below that. And in fact, Pleasanton Unified's self-reported arrest data is twice the rate of Oakland Unified. Actually, it's 4 times the rate of Oakland Unified. The number of students that are arrested in Pleasanton is twice the number as those arrested in Oakland, despite the fact that Oakland is actually over twice the size of Pleasanton Unified. Right, so this is data that was extremely alarming to me. However, there are alternatives. Again, there are other school districts that have been wrestling with the issue of how to utilize alternatives. And there are some guest speakers today that will also discuss alternatives. But I just wanted to share this data to set the context for the work moving forward. And with that, I believe I'm going to transition over to Venetia Dave.
Thank you, Oscar, for providing all that information and data about the SROs, as well as the legal basis to demonstrate how the program operates. Next, we will have a video that is created in regards to public comment made in the city liaison meeting by Michaela Tran, a PUSD alumni, with her testimony about her experience with SROs. We've been granted by Michaela herself to present this video to our audience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing me time to speak. My name is Michaela Tran. I use she, her pronouns, and I've lived in Pleasanton, California my entire life. I graduated from Foothill High School in 2017, and I'm currently a rising senior at UC Berkeley. First off, I want to say thank you for arranging this special meeting tonight. I am by all means a direct product of Pleasanton and our amazing community, and I thank all of you for your dedication to ensuring the well-being and safety of our residents. That being said, I'm calling in today to express my concerns of the ways that policing is performed in our community. To do so, I'd like to share a police encounter that a close friend of mine, who I will call Jane in order to protect her privacy, experienced at only 12 years of age. To this day, Jane cannot talk or even think about Pleasanton PD without reliving the traumatic encounter she had with her school's student resource officer back in middle school many years ago. Unbeknownst to Jane and her family at the time, Jane has bipolar disorder, and she had an episode one day where she got upset at school and tried to run away from campus. The school's SRO responded by pinning her down, face down to the ground, placing her in handcuffs, and dragging her into the back of a police car, all while students, teachers, and staff looked on. Jane was then driven to the police station where her parents had to pick up their sobbing and traumatized young daughter that day. There are many members of the Pleasanton community that have not had such traumatic experiences with our local police department. I'm happy to hear that, yet that is not the issue at stake here. The issue is that for every story like Jane's, countless others exist. On average, our police department responds to nearly 500 mental health calls a year. Thus, I asked Pleasanton to reallocate these responsibilities and fund a separate unit of trained mental health professionals to respond to these crises, in hopes that no other Pleasanton resident endures the same traumatic experience that young Jane did years ago. Chief David Swain, you recently stated that PPD is committed to transparency, to listening, learning, and improving the way policing is performed in our community. I'm happy to hear that, and I look forward to the progressive and urgent changes that you enact within the police department to uphold this commitment. I support methods to increase citizen oversight over community policing in order to improve police transparency and accountability in our city. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who shared their knowledge and important information about the SRO program. We are now going to present our asks to our 2 elected representatives. Pleasanton Councilmember Valerie Arkin and School Board Trustee Kelly McCaughey, we are now going to present our requests for the agreement, the MOU, between the school board, the city, and the police department. I will read the asks and will call on each of you to respond with a yes or a no. We will have time allocated later for you to give remarks.
Venetia, hold on a second, Venetia.
Yes.
Is Trustee Maher abstaining due to the Brown Act?
I
It was brought to our attention. I would say that either trustee Maher or myself express our opinions, but one of us should abstain due to the Brown Act because there's another trustee part of the city liaison that's part of these conversations. And so I think it would just be better safe than sorry.
we were planning to get to him later, but right now we're just focusing on you and Councilmember Arkin.
Yeah, you know,
Okay, so
this is Councilmember Arkin, and yes, I think Councilmember Julie Testa may also be on this Zoom, and Mayor Brown and I are the two on the city liaison, so we've got to be, due to Brown Act, we have to be careful with this. I'm happy to speak, but I just, you know, it's a bit of an issue.
So I don't want to put a hiccup in, but if it's okay, I would actually suggest to have the members of the city liaison express their votes and the other council members give their, give comments, but not make a statement on how they would potentially vote, just to be safe on the Brown Act. I just would feel more comfortable. I apologize, we didn't present this ahead of time. I just rather it be safe than we need to protect ourselves due to the Brown Act. So would that be okay? Trustee Maher and Councilmember Arkin, you two are the members on the city liaison. Would that be okay?
Well, I'm not answering these questions. They have another question for me.
I'm sorry, Trustee Maher, are you saying you're not going to respond to any of them anyway?
Well, no, they have another request they're going to be talking to me about, but not these. Am I correct?
But I'm assuming, so sorry to interrupt, but that you don't have a quorum.
Right, but they could discuss this topic later at a city liaison meeting and it could become a serial discussion. So I just would rather be safe than sorry. So
3 of us, you're correct.
yeah, so I would suggest that Steve Maher and Councilmember Arkin respond to these. And then when we have comments, then Councilmember Testa and I can give comments, but we are not going to present any indication of how we would potentially vote.
Sorry, if I could.
So in other words, I would just replace and ask, Trustee Maher to respond to this. And I think I should not potentially respond to the vote just due to the Brown Act. And I apologize for not mentioning this ahead of time, but I think it is important. I can make comments, but not present.
We will go forward with this. We have asked both you, Councilmember Arkin and Trustee McCaughey, that you had agreed to these asks ahead of time.
Yes, I understand, but it was brought to our attention about the Brown Act. So go ahead. You can go ahead and I'll abstain.
Then we will solely ask Councilmember Arkin.
Yeah, that's what I recommend. I apologize.
Yeah,
Okay.
and just to be clear, I did not know that Councilmember Vice Mayor Testa, I should say, was going to be on here. As somebody that you would ask this, not just somebody observing, but somebody asking opinions as well, because even though there's only 2 of us, because Mayor Brown is also on the liaison committee. So Mayor Brown and I are both on that and have expressed some opinions. And now if now I have knowledge of a 3rd member opinion on something that we haven't had the proper public process for and we haven't voted on yet, that's where the Brown Act.
I understand, Councilmember Arkin, but we are not asking to commit. We have also not asked Councilmember Testa for regarding the request. We have only asked you and Trustee McCaughey.
Yes, Manisha, the challenge is that there's another trustee, Mary Jo Carrion, who's on the city liaison committee, that this conversation could come up down the road. And if this is publicized and recorded, then she would know how I feel about the vote. So I would just continue with Councilmember Arkin, and I just will abstain.
Yes.
Okay, and just one further clarification, since this is being recorded, if this is shown to the rest of my council or to the rest of the school board, that could be a violation. So I want to clarify that this is more for your members and not being broadcast on social media or anywhere where the rest of the council sees what my opinion is. And that could, because there's 2 of us on the liaison committee. So I just want to.
If we were to pause the recording, would that be okay with you?
That would be fine. And I'm actually not, I don't have any problem with it being recorded, but the rest of the council can't have access to it. More members can't have access to it. So I don't know what format you would be showing this in as a recording. That's where it can get a little sticky. So
Just continue on. I'll just abstain, but during the comments, I can make comments. I'm just not going to make an opinion on the ratification of potential vote. It's just, I apologize. It was brought to attention right before we went on air, and we do need to consider it due to the Brown Act. So we don't want to delay the process anymore. Go ahead and continue. And then during the comments, I will have lots to say.
And if you think this could be recorded and shown in something that would be shown to the rest of the council or school board, then maybe during us electeds responses to this, maybe it could be stopped, the recording, just so we don't get in trouble with that.
Okay, so I think if you're not comfortable with the recording being shown, that's fine. We will not show them.
Brave enough to meet those moments of vulnerability. And I think some of you actually already brought that to light as you were sharing some of your comments in terms of your feedback, right? So when I think about restorative justice and the shifts that it's made in many schools, not just in Oakland, but in places like Colorado, LA, Oregon, San Jose, really thinking about building a community of healing within the schools where young people trust teachers and administration, and they also trust each other to be able to lean in those moments of conflict or crisis. I want to urge that it's particularly important when we think about this moment of a pandemic and sheltering in place, and we see the increase in mental health challenges amongst young people. When we come back into space physically together, I think so many times the conversation can be focused on PPE, on, you know, safety in those terms, but what about the mental health challenges that folks will face? So implementing restorative justice practices that center wellness and they center healing, so that young people really have a space where they can lean in to feel safe enough and brave enough. Some of the benefits of restorative justice that I think engage in some of the things that you all have shared. Aside from increased trust, I think a lot about the disruption of the school to prison pipeline. When we look at data around suspension and expulsion, right? And we begin to look at what the core of the issue is, or even when our young people might get arrested in a moment of crisis without calling the therapist, often they engage with so many adults and so many people along their path before their needs are actually met. So really creating a wellness system that is wrapped around, a wellness system that is holistic, that focuses on wellness and safety, where young people, community members, and their parents are also a part of the conversation. So then we engage in a process that's not about doing to, but being with. And I've seen restorative justice also be transformative in situations that were really escalated. And folks said, how did you deal with this? And we were able to engage with it because we already created a culture of healing within the community where young people also have these practices, right? So it's not just the adults and administration and teachers that are pushing and engaging in this process. So really thinking about restorative justice as creating a culture of healing. So rather than a culture of harming, creating a culture of healing where folks who are also directly impacted have a say in what comes next and how do we move forward. And so it's really a systemic transformation, and that's really hard, you know, but I've definitely see it be really transformative in some of these places that I've named. And I think it's also really aligned with some of the things that I've heard representatives already name and cite in the space. So thank you all for having me. And please, you know, you can continue to look at our work through Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and many other organizations. And, you know, honestly, schools who are engaging in restorative justice from a holistic lens.
Thank you, Jody, for your comment. And to everyone on the call, we really appreciate you listening to the community testimonies and our requests to our elected representatives. And we now want to invite you to continue this conversation about your reactions to what you just heard or what concerns and learnings you are taking from the session in small groups. And we will be opening up breakouts now for about 7 minutes, and we welcome you to share. If you don't want to join the breakout rooms, we invite you to take a small break while we discuss and join us back in the about 7 minutes. And once you enter the breakout rooms, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we invite you to share a one-word feeling about what you just heard. And we also invite you to discuss your concerns about SROs in schools and how they should be held accountable. We'll be posting this format shown on the screen in the chat for your reference in these groups.
I'm looking for singles.
I was alone in my breakout room, so I left.
Would you be able to put Layla in a room with some of the youth leaders?
Not right now. Sorry. Wait, what's your last name?
It is Tuati. She's in room 12 right now.
She's in there with Lanny and Lori. I don't want to yank him out right now. One of us needs to go and sort of check out, like, feel out how this is going. That's about as hot as it gets, what just happened. So. Monith Brittany's an 18. Councilmember Kick is an 18. Want to just give her a heads up that we're going to give her a shout out.
Yeah, I can't chat her while she's in a. I can message her.
Yeah, just go in there. Both pastors are in there.
Okay, sounds good.
Marie, we went in around 6:51, I think.
I believe so. We probably have like, we could do 2 more minutes and then call people back for Q&A. I can also, you could like broadcast a message to all the breakout rooms to say to everyone.
So did we chat them that it was like intro? 2 was reaction to what you heard. 3 was concerns or thoughts or alternatives to policing. Is that what we said it was?
The last one was concerns, and then how should we hold officers accountable?
Concerns and
accountability, basically.
How should we hold SROs accountable?
I can just broadcast a message that we'll be having everybody rejoin the main room at 7 p.m. maybe.
We will end the breakouts at 7 p.m. Minutes. And the thing about this is that we have 3 minutes. I think we have 1 question. We only have 1.
Do you want them to be back at 7 exactly? Because we should stop the breakout rooms now because it gives them that minute.
I accidentally left my room. Can you send me back for 1 second?
Progress.
You should be able, is there anything at the bottom that says breakout room? You should be able to rejoin.
I'm on my phone, so.
Oh, sorry. Okay. It's ending in T minus 23 seconds.
All right. I just totally interrupted someone's question they were asking me, but I'll find them in chat.
Mary, I'll see you. I have a hard stop. Okay, bye.
I got pushed out of my breakout room as well.
Hi, Gliding.
I'm remuting myself.
Oh.
All right. So I'm just going to take a few seconds to just make sure everyone's back in the meeting. But thank you for sharing in the breakout rooms. If you have anything you would like to share, please chat the host. We would also like to acknowledge and thank the following people for attending and also for their leadership. If you'd like, you may wave. First, we have Pleasanton Council Member Julie Testa. Do we have her in the audience? Next we have Council Member Brittany Kick from Livermore. And also, we would like to thank the Grassroots Law Project, the Amador alumni who are on this call, and also who had created this campaign. We could have not done this without them, and we would just like to wish them good luck in college.
Yeah,
So just a
even
little applause for
I'm
them.
also another alumni from Dublin High School, as I just graduated, but I also mentioned I was in the Explore program. I was in many organizations similar to grassroots projects. As this thing, I think I might participate in this thing as I was part of DAJA. I've been involved in many organizations similar to this because I did community ones. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your participation in those types of organizations. But now we will move on for the little time we have for questions. So, Mega.
Okay, so first we have a question from a 30-year resident of Pleasanton. And this question is for the trustee members, so Trustee McCaughey and Trustee Maher. So this resident said how they're quite concerned that the 500K program has been running for over 20 years without an MOU, and that the MOU is a good first step, but is long overdue. So they were asking, how will the board and city gain visibility into the regular activities and its impact, and to ensure some accountability for the results? So either Trustee McCaughey or Trustee Maher, you can answer.
This is Trustee Maher. I'll try to take a stab at answering this. It's certainly long overdue that we haven't discussed the SRO program, although the DARE and the SRO program have come up a little bit in my tenure. And now we're trying to set things straight and have an MOU and qualify what we expect and what students can expect, what parents can expect. And we're moving forward. It's not a slow process, but certainly it's come before the city and district liaison committee. Once it moves forward from there, it will go to the respective boards and council. And then I'm sure there'll be questions there. So there'll be amendments put into there. But I'm looking forward to it being completed by the end of September. I'm hoping. Kelly, do you have comments?
Sure. I would just like to reiterate the comment about, yes, an MOU has not been put in place. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I do think a job description for the school resource officer would be a recommended next step, and having that visible, as well as I do know there is a supervisor assigned to the school resource officer, but having that review process aligned to the performance, and having communication update report from the district on how progress is being made with an MOU moving forward. And, we certainly as trustees can ask for updates on a quarterly basis, and, hearing success stories. I've had an opportunity to sit on some presentations by school resource officers, and they celebrate some of the successes. I think that sometimes we don't hear enough about the positives of their work. And I think that continued communication to talk about how the program's going will make that visibility more clear and transparent to the community. I think that's important, and one thing to improve in the process.
Okay, thank you for your responses. Our next question is, can restorative justice and the SRO program run concurrently? And this is for Jody, if you want to answer.
Thank you for that question. So I think for me personally, my value of radical honesty, I think that in order for restorative justice to really be a transformative shift, there should not be SROs in schools. Right now in Oakland and many other schools actually across the country, folks are exploring what that looks like for police or SROs not to be on campus. So in Oakland, we actually passed a resolution, and we are in the second phase of the design team. And that means also working with mental health practitioners and mental health institutions that can really hold that space on campus. So when people are in crisis, it also means building collaborative relationships with elders and organizers and community organizations who can help support with de-escalation so that situations don't get to a heightened level. And we have a really incredible foundation, I think, already to be able to dream about this next iteration as a part of our design process. So I think that it's important when one wants to engage in restorative justice to really recognize that it requires a transformative shift. It requires a cultural shift. Sometimes I've seen examples where folks have brought restorative justice into schools, organizations, businesses, and then it becomes a practice that's doing to folks rather than with, right? And so to be really critical about it, but also restorative justice isn't just about the specific circle process, right? But looking at our policies and practices that are in place that help to design the culture that we then begin to be embedded in. So for example, if a school says we want to engage in restorative justice, but their first response to harm, right, is often suspension, that becomes problematic, because then restorative justice becomes one of those tools that you put in a toolbox and you only use it when it's rusty. And so recognizing, for me in my practice of restorative justice, and to do it with fidelity, it is about a cultural shift and not just another tool that we kind of use to control our students and to create the environment that works for us that might not serve our young people best. And there's examples of this from many other countries, as well as not just Oakland. I talk a lot about Oakland because that's where my organization is based, but we also do work all across the country, from places like Selma to like what I named before, Colorado. So I hope that is helpful, but really thinking about restorative justice as a cultural shift rather than a program.
Okay, thank you so much. The next questions are going to be directed for Oscar. So the first one is the EDCLC available to help school boards and police departments develop their SRO so that the program is legal, and how can they ensure that due process of students is ensured?
That is a really good question. What we do is we actually partner with the students themselves. And so my job is to support the students in advocating for their goals. So we are happy to support any school district as long as that school district is open to working with the students themselves.
Okay, and our next question for you is, what specific statistics and examples of both pros and cons exist on the SRO program here in Pleasanton?
In Pleasanton, I showed some of the data from the civil rights data collection. I don't believe that there has ever been an assessment or an evaluation of the school resource officer program since it began back in 2002, I believe. So I don't have any specifics about Pleasanton's program. However, the data from the Department of Justice that I have reviewed, some of the meta research that has been conducted, has all indicated that school resource officers actually do not, in fact, make schools safer. There is no correlation at all between school resource officer programs and safety. There are, however, a few research studies that have indicated that having school resource officers actually hardens schools and results in the over-criminalization of students. Specifically, there is research indicating that rather than referring students to, say, a principal's office or a counselor, instead, students are unnecessarily referred to law enforcement.
Thank you. And our last question for you is, how can an officer declaim a child 5150 with 40 hours of training?
Good question. So that goes to the required training. Actually, it's not training, but the California state does provide 40 hours of training for any school resource officers at K through 12 schools, at Cal States or at UCs. However, there isn't really a significant mental health component to it. Under state law, California Welfare and Institution Code 5150 and 5150.5, any agency that is authorized by the county to conduct mental health assessments can do that. And in Alameda County, that does include the mobile crisis unit. They are specifically authorized by Alameda County to conduct mental health assessments. In other words, there is no need to involve law enforcement in those assessments. And in fact, Alameda County would prefer that first responders not be called for 5150s.
Okay, thank you so much, Jody and Oscar, and the rest of the community members who are here with us. So we really appreciate all the engagement throughout the Q&A and the energy around this issue. Moving forward, we would love to have our student involvement expand outside of just Pleasanton. So if you are a student from any high school in Livermore, Dublin, or Pleasanton, and you want to get involved, we invite you to fill out a Google form, which is going to be attached in the chat. We really hope to gather a Tri-Valley-wide student coalition focused on interrupting the student to prison pipeline, or sorry, the school to prison pipeline, and creating a school environment that is welcoming to all students. If you also want more information on Genesis or the Genesis Summer Intern Program that I was also part of, you can fill out the same form. And finally, if you have a question or feedback from this forum, you can also fill out the form. So thank you all again for coming out tonight and listening to community voices on this issue. We look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering student-informed policy changes. My understanding is that there are some reporters in the audience, so we will open a breakout room if you have questions for our team. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Powerful.
Grace. Did such a great job. Thank you.
You guys